We were able to
We don't need to change the aux. So we have an output going there within the program.
Lauren, I had one quick question on slide 14 where it speaks to 8% under provisionally licensed compared to 10 years ago. 10 years ago, provisional licensure even an option, and if so, wasn't it new as a potential means of getting folks teaching in classes? But I believe it was pretty new in its potential. And so I guess, so as I look at it, we're still looking at to take that out relatively same percentage being licensed in one fashion or another with a fully provision. I just, thank you. Other questions? Question? Yes. Follow up? Are there any SOL collection of comparative numbers between all of this? Lauren, if I may kind of dovetail on that, so on my slide 21, that was all based on local school division response. And from my personal teaching experience, I know I was always evaluated based on the local administrative criteria, i.e. my lesson plans, things of that nature. And I can just say anecdotally that there were some not so good teachers who did great lesson plans. And some other great teachers, that was not their strong suit. And I'm not aware of any school division, and did y'all in your research find any school division that does factor in student success or the student's opinion of the teacher into their well-prepared, moderately well-prepared, or whatever? I believe I'm correct. No school division factors that in their reporting. That'd be accurate. Y'all are limited in what y'all had to go with just what they told y'all. So, okay. Right. Thank you. Got the hook out.
Please let me know if y'all hear me.
We
Seems
can
a
hear
lot
you.
better. Okay.
Now you're going to get more questions.
All right. And now I'll share a couple of barriers to teacher preparation that we identified, as well as some proposed.
Trade off.
One or the other. Given that across Virginia's pathways, traditional programs have ample capacity and tend to produce teachers who are well prepared, we looked for any barriers that are currently preventing more individuals from coming through this direct pathway to full licensure. One barrier we found is an assessment called the VCLA. It's only used in Virginia, outdated, and in some cases creates an unnecessary barrier to using traditional prep programs. Virginia currently requires individuals to pass 2 tests to become a fully licensed teacher. The first is the VCLA, which I just mentioned, and that's a Virginia-specific test with 2 subtests on reading comprehension and written communication. Many traditional prep programs require passage of the VCLA before individuals can begin their teacher preparation. Virginia also requires practice subject assessments, which are used nationally to measure specific content knowledge. The content of the VCLA is outdated, and it's irrelevant for certain endorsement areas. Virginia developed the VCLA back in 2007, and it hasn't been changed since. VCLA also currently tests individuals on skills like advanced copy editing that aren't necessary for at least some types of teachers, like math and PE teachers. In addition to being outdated and irrelevant for certain teachers, the VCLA also keeps some individuals from using traditional prep programs, right when the state needs more people entering the teacher pipeline. While 86% of test takers eventually pass the VCLA, 14% do not, which is about 630 test takers annually. According to staff at 11 teacher prep programs, failure to pass required assessments like the VCLA is the top reason individuals can't enroll in or complete their program. An important thing to keep in mind here is the VCLA isn't the only quality assurance metric for prospective teachers. Along with the VCLA, individuals must be admitted into their higher education institution based on things like their GPA, and their standardized test scores. And then for many programs, they need a minimum GPA and a minimum number of credit hours to start teacher preparation. Then there's another gate before they're approved for student teaching with tests, GPA, and coursework requirements. And after they complete student teaching and all degree requirements, they're finally eligible for full licensure from DOE. The VCLA is just one of many requirements in this whole process. Given the VCLA's content deficiencies, the fact that it's reducing the number of individuals able to use teacher prep programs, we recommend that the state either replace the VCLA with a more relevant and nationally recognized test, or eliminate it entirely as a requirement for full licensure. In the short term, while action is being taken on the VCLA, I think a waiver should be created for traditional teacher prep programs, similar to the one already granted to school divisions. Superintendents can recommend a provisionally licensed teacher for full licensure if they've tried but failed to pass required tests, as long as they meet certain criteria. Many divisions that responded to our survey reported using the waiver, but it's had an unintended consequence of creating a disincentive for individuals to use traditional prep programs, which currently lack a similar waiver. Prep program staff report some individuals who can't pass the VCLA either can't start preparation or end up leaving traditional programs under a provisional license. This can be detrimental because they miss out on the student teaching that's part of those traditional. To encourage students to continue using rigorous pathways, we recommend creating a waiver to enable higher ed prep programs, recommend qualified individuals for full licensure, even if they haven't passed the VCLA. We also have a recommendation related to a regulatory requirement that would further help improve supply of teachers, which we explain a little bit more in chapter 3 of our written report. Another thing we found is that the cost of completing traditional higher ed prep programs can be a substantial barrier for some students. I'm sure this is not a surprise because it echoes conversations about the cost of higher ed more broadly. In the context of Virginia's teacher pipeline, costs coming up is something that needs to be addressed for many individuals to be able to use the largest rigorous pathway that Virginia currently has. We surveyed new teachers in Virginia and collected feedback from teacher prep program staff. Both cited cost as a key barrier to attending traditional prep programs. Nearly 75% of new teachers from traditional programs said cost was a moderate or significant barrier, and those were the people who made it through the programs. Similarly, staff from 10 traditional prep programs said financial concerns were a top reason why individuals don't enter or complete their programs. Virginia already has a relatively small program to help reduce the cost of tuition and fees for traditional preparation. The program provides scholarship loans, which are different than traditional loans because individuals don't pay them back unless they fail to meet the program's required 2-year teaching commitment. The program currently receives a little over $700,000 per year, which funds scholarship loans for about 75 individuals. 2 large institutions each reported having 50 to 100 students who could benefit from the program if additional funding was given. There's likely more unmet demand at other institutions. We looked at a couple neighboring states to see how they fund similar programs. Their programs are fairly large compared to Virginia's. North Carolina gave $6 million in fiscal year 23 and has proposed $11 million for fiscal year 24. Maryland gave $8 million in fiscal year 23 and $12 million in 24. Meet unmet demand and enable more individuals to complete traditional prep programs, we have a recommendation to provide additional funding for Virginia's teaching scholarship loan program. The amount of the increase here is definitely a policy decision. We have a table in chapter 3 of our report, with some examples of how additional funding could be provided, how many students would benefit under the different scenarios.
Question?
Yes, sir. Thank you. So you talked at length about the BCLA. What exactly is that? What's required? Where'd it come from? Why did somebody consider it important back whenever?
Delia, the VCLA is a Virginia specific test. We know it has 2 subtests. So it covers reading and writing. And it's something that's typically required before individuals are even able to begin their preparation at most of the public higher ed institutions, and some of the private institutions as well. We know it was implemented back in 2007. There have been some proposals to update tests as recently as 2017, but it's just not something that's been updated. And when we spoke with division staff, when we spoke with prep program staff, it just really doesn't sound like it's testing individuals on things that all teachers are needing to be successful.
Further question? Lauren, quick question on 30, and you may or may not know this. Do you know of any of our higher institution colleges of education that have a collaborative agreement with our community college system?
Mr. Chairman, I know that there are some courses that individuals can take for the community colleges. We also have one of our career switcher programs is run by an entity called Educate VA, which works with community colleges. So the community college system is involved in this space, but it does not have a teacher preparation program.
And I guess specific to that point, I know for instance, Virginia Tech has a collaborative agreement with the college system for students wanting to go into their College of Agriculture. That if they maintain a certain grade level coming out of community college, they will be admitted to the College of Agriculture in their junior year. We're not aware of that anywhere in our community colleges and higher institutions, correct? Okay, thank you. Thank you. No, I stirred them up. Yes, sir.
So, Senator, the division waiver is something that's been in place. And that type of a waiver certainly is a policy. And it's something that perhaps in Virginia's on the other side of the teacher shortage. Hopefully, in a few years, that could be something that's looked at again. For the time being, because that waiver exists on the division side, you're hearing that it really is acting as a disincentive for individuals who are currently going through the higher education programs. Because if they can't pass the required assessments, they then either don't do the traditional preparation programs at all if they can't get in, or some who are in those programs drop out and just teach under provisional license. So that waiver in general is something that certainly we do note could be looked at down the road, but for now, it's like there might be some benefit to having some consistency across the different pathways for what students are required to do to progress.
And if I may, Lauren, y'all's recommendations that it may be looked at. You don't have a specific recommendation whether it's done away with or anything that'd be accurate
With the, Mr. Chairman.
with the waiver process, just to be looked at.
Yes, that's correct. For a waiver to be created and then down the road, it could be looked at as well as the division waiver.
Further question? Yes, sir.
One follow-up, and I appreciate the highlights of the CLA. One of the concerns that I've had through constituents, people entering the teaching profession, is also those who have English as a second language. Where engineer, plenty of credential, reading fine, but written not your passing score. And so there are some interesting barriers also where we need, like lots of parts of also our teachers to look like kids in the classroom, and that is a barrier to achieving that. So this waiver would also help some of that.
Senator, the waiver could help some of that. Also just removing either updating the VCLA so that it's so that the state uses nationally recognized test, or eliminating the VCLA. That would also help that disparity. And you're absolutely right. We were told that certain student populations do struggle even more to pass the VCLA than others. And the English language learners, that was certainly a population that we were told has difficulty.
One follow-up.
Yes, sir.
Did any discussion through the surveys come up in parity or disparity? I also have a fairly high veteran population, great, and spouses transferring in and using our process to teach in Virginia. One of the complaints or downside is that those teachers coming in, they'll also see people coming in with very different standards to get to teach. Did that come up through any of the research?
Yes, Senator, we do have a little bit of information that I'll get to about the licensure process itself. And that is something where those coming into Virginia through the reciprocity pathway, that's something that we were told could be clarified. And for the veteran population in particular, we didn't have a lot of specific feedback on that population. We do know that it's somewhat unique in that they are prioritized in terms of the licensure processing times, that particular population is, but certainly reciprocity.
Thank you, Lauren. Continue.
I have two more short sections that I want to cover today, starting with the licensure process. During our review of BDOE a few years ago, JLARC staff identified several problems with the state's teacher licensure process, including that applications were paper-based and had to be mailed in, and many divisions said the process was taking too long. The legislature gave BDOE some funding to improve the licensure process. However, we found that BDOE's licensure process was still lengthy and frustrating for some applicants during our research. But BDOE plans to implement a new licensure system this fall that they expect will help improve things. We'll quickly recap what's been done and where things are now. BDOE attempted to update their licensure system beginning in 2021. That attempt was unsuccessful. They hired a new vendor earlier this year. They've been working with the vendor to launch a new system. As of late August, BDOE said they're on track to this fall. They also have worked through their licensure backlog, at least for the time being. Renewable licenses were automatically extended 1 year while the agency was working through its backlog. So those will be something they have to address. Another thing we found related to the licensure process that some divisions and individuals applying for licensure believe licensure requirements are unclear. According to divisions who responded to our survey, several aspects of licensure need to be clarified. The top two items were which specific courses fulfill the state licensure requirements and the requirements for reciprocity between states. And after looking through available licensure materials online, DOE does not publish key information about those two items. There's no information for provisionally licensed teachers about which specific courses will fulfill their licensure requirements, which can cause confusion and delay when these teachers are able to get a full license. There's also no information for teachers in other states about whether their license transfers to Virginia. We have to go through the process of completing a licensure application to learn whether their license will take some time and potentially discourage them from wanting to teach in Virginia. We have two recommendations that would help increase the clarity here. The first would have VDOE work with higher ed institutions to publish specific courses that fulfill licensure requirements. The second would have VDOE publish a crosswalk of the specific license types and endorsements in other states that Virginia currently accepts through reciprocity. Both of these items will take some time to pull together, so DOE should prioritize working with institutions that teach the most provisional license holders and other states with the most teachers transferring to Virginia.
Question?
Chairman?
Thought you had a mind. Go ahead. Yes. So,
Slide 44. So forgive me for not knowing, but you talk about the disparity between the divisions. I just guess that all divisions have the same basic requirements, as far as licensure. So how are the different divisions different? Why?
Yes, delegate. So all the divisions do have the same requirements for licensure itself, but they didn't necessarily all think that the same things needed to be clarified. So when we surveyed them, we asked what needed to be clarified, and we did get some different responses from different divisions, but the top things that emerged that really needed to be clarified were the specific courses that fulfill requirements, which are going to be the same across all divisions, and also the reciprocity piece. Now, there is a little bit of complexity in those requirements depending on what type of teaching endorsement area someone's pursuing. So there are some key things that individuals need: bachelor's degree, they have to meet subject area requirements, professional studies requirements, which are things like instruction, managing classroom behavior. But what you need in terms of those specific courses is going to vary depending on the type of endorsement you're pursuing. And that's where people just get a little bit confused based on the information that's out there.
Lauren, follow up on that. These responses, I presume, in the 75 divisions came from their HR department.
That's correct. Okay, now just wrap up with a few slides on the state's ability to evaluate the teacher pipeline. This isn't a huge issue compared to some of my earlier findings, but regularly evaluating our teacher pipeline would better position the state to deal with teacher shortages. It's also something other states are starting to do. Virginia currently has a limited ability to evaluate its teacher pipeline because there isn't centralized information about employment and performance, either by preparation pathway or program. Without this information, the state has a limited ability to determine how to improve the pipeline. For example, current data does not enable prospective teachers, DOE, policymakers, or even prep programs to know which specific programs are producing well-prepared teachers or which pathways should be expanded or improved. Other states, including Tennessee, Delaware, Florida, and Colorado, have the information needed to help answer these questions. Therefore, we have recommendations for the state to start sharing teacher outcome information with their respective prep programs and start publishing some teacher outcomes in aggregate by preparation pathway and program every couple of years Improvements can be recommended as needed. And Mr. Chairman, that's all I have this morning.
Any questions? Thank you, Laura. No question before Justin comes up. Just in general, I will make the comment, and I've shared with this Al previously, in the full commission report, many of the specific recommendations involve recommending the appropriations committee include budget language, things of that nature. Just as personal, the reports are based on data y'all have collected, me therefore very beneficial, and the relevant House Senate committees to consider and hearing the full policy implications change. So I would suggest most of these recommendations should be going to the respective education committee so they get a full hearing with this as a background, but we get all the stakeholders, parents, administrators weighing in on the matter. Appropriations just doesn't have the bandwidth of time to address all the policy implications of the recommendation. So I just share that as a personal thought going forward. Any other questions? Justin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very good point about the standing committees. Just real quickly, how I've foreshadowed this. I want to put a few things in context before the administration comes up. And I'm going to say less than what I had planned because the smart questions from our former teachers, I think, kind of elucidated some of the discussion about performance and quality. But there's this tone that we somehow missed the boat and looked at the wrong things in terms of what produces a quality teacher. The letter states that we do a disservice by narrowly defining high quality teacher programs. It notes that there's some teachers from indirect pathways with provisional licensures who are very good teachers. And we heard that, read that in the research, and we actually say that on page 12 of the written report pretty clearly. The letter also says that we should have focused more on data about teacher performance in the classroom. And when we would have loved to have done that, but some of your questions got at the blind spot in terms of what actually happens in the classroom. And that's why we had two separate recommendations to try to start to compile some data to get some better insight into that. The letter also just kind of oddly, frankly, characterizes traditional preparation programs as this antiquated approach and just implies that there's this new, fully proven, readily available pathway that suddenly produce a bunch of new teachers. And the reality is that these traditional prep programs put out 2,600 teachers last year. We have residency programs that are very rigorous, but they're very expensive. They put out less than 100 last year. And there's this new apprenticeship program, which really has a lot of promise. Federal funds, I think, could be a huge benefit here. But just last week, we contacted all the program administrators. And by our count, as of last week, there's between 1 and 10 apprentices. So that holds promise, but frankly, it's going to take some time for that to get off. So I just wanted to kind of put all that in context about what comprises the pipeline, what the blind spots were. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I believe the secretary wanted to say a few words, and then I think.
Any questions, Justin? Hey, Justin. So, Madam Secretary, Madam Superintendent, y'all have the podium, whether you want to do a tag team, however you want to proceed.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr.
Morning.
Chairman. And thank you, JLARC, for the opportunity to collaborate, review, and today to provide comments on JLARC's report on Virginia's K-12 teacher pipeline. We appreciate the detailed analysis of current teacher development pathways and the focus on the critical need to increase the transparency around teacher licensure and transparency around the professional development. And also, as was just noted, to expand the innovative teacher pipeline models that we think are very, very promising. While we agree with the general direction of most of the recommendations, we also have specific feedback on some core emissions analysis, which Justin just referenced to. These include the following 3 items. First of all, there must be a deeper analysis around regional vacancy data. Because there's such variance across the Commonwealth, we know that there are school divisions from which we can learn about the successful approaches that they've used of building successful pipelines and dealing with the shortages. Management matters, and we can learn from the leaders and the superintendents and the divisions that have figured out how to make sure that we have great teachers in all of our classrooms. Second of all, the report doesn't ground the definition of a quality teacher in student learning. I believe that every one of the recommendations that are in this report and that every decision that we collectively make in education must be guided by research around that is data-based. This includes in our teacher development approaches and specifically the ability to make sure that we can link how we're investing in our teachers and the result of student outcomes. To do this, as was just mentioned in the last couple of moments by Lauren and by Justin, we must have a robust teacher data system. For example, the findings that were talked about the teacher preparation programs today that were mentioned by Delegate Ware are all based on survey data. Our teachers deserve more. We need to have actual facts and data that tell us what is working and what are we getting the results. This cannot just be by survey data. That's how we're making decisions. And finally, the JLARC analysis fails to include the measurable improvement of the licensure system that BDOE has been leading over the past 5 months. Superintendent to reference that and provide more detail. Before I turn the podium over to Dr. Coons to talk further about the work she's leading at the department, I want to outline 4 overarching principles that I think should guide all of our work to develop a best-in-class teacher workforce and pipeline. First of all, we must acknowledge and celebrate that a quality teacher is critical to student success. We know teachers matter. Among school-related factors, a high-quality teacher is the most important determinant of student achievement. Our goal, I believe our shared goal, is to have a highly effective, licensed, quality teacher leading every single classroom in the class. Second of all, we have to define quality as defined by outcomes. The quality teacher is one that has a positive impact on the ultimate goal of education, student learning. We are focused on outcomes in this administration, and every decision in the pathways discussion has to be anchored by what improves student results. Third of all, related, data fuels improvement. As the last point that Lauren just made, we must have actionable quality data and research to make informed decisions on these important issues and in all issues in education. We need a robust data system so we can identify what is working and that we can learn and replicate from those successes. But one of the most important uses of data is feedback information to provide teachers as well as schools and educator preparation programs the data, information, and evidence that they need to be used for continuous improvement and to make adjustments to get better results. No profession can operate without quality information. And nowhere is this more important than to have timely, actionable information that is supporting our teachers. And finally, we must be focused on attracting, retaining, and growing the greatest teacher workforce in the country. To do this, we need to embrace innovation, and we need to provide robust, proven, quality alternative pathways into the classroom. As the report mentions, it costs an average of $57,000 for Virginians to become teachers through our traditional higher education system. And that is fine. Those programs provide a lot of teachers, as Justin has said. But we also know that there are emerging and also well-established pathway programs that are able to get quality teachers into classrooms more efficiently and to ensure high quality teaching is happening. And critically, we must recognize and reward our teachers. I want to highlight that over the past 2 years, our teachers across the colony from the state have received a 5%, 5%, and possibly, as the governor signs the budget, another 2% increase in salary. This is emblematic of the historic investments that this administration and General Assembly together have made supporting our K-12 education system, including our educators. It is now my pleasure to turn the microphone over to our State Superintendent, Dr. Lisa Coons, who will provide greater detail into the work she is leading to ensure that we have a quality teacher in front of every student. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Gadara, and thank you to JLARC for raising this important issue and speaking about the teacher pipeline challenges. I think it's important to note that most of the research and the work that JLARC did was based on October 2022 data because that was the data that was available at the time of their research. August 1st was another collection point for the Virginia Department of Education, and we have updated 2023 data, which was provided recently to JLARC. This data indicates a bit of a shift in our vacancies. It says that we have 3,970 vacancies with 6% rates of vacancies, primarily in the Tidewater and the Southside area. But most importantly, it says 3 Northern Virginia districts carry 1,200 of those vacancies. So this is truly a localized issue, and it's truly an issue that is not happening across all school divisions. 20% of our school divisions have 0 or 1 vacancies today. So we know that the management of the school divisions matters. As JLARC mentioned, working conditions are a primary reason that teachers are leaving the field. And if you remember JLARC and Lauren's great video that showed the increasing amount of teachers exiting, we have to think about those working conditions and the management of schools and making sure that we are elevating our teachers and supporting them with their workload and their needs inside the school division. In addition, those school divisions who are showing 1 or 0 vacancies have developed their own pipelines, have worked to build Teacher for Tomorrow programs, have worked to ensure their future teachers are graduating with associate's degree. They're doing signing bonuses to bringing teachers back. And we're seeing those strong superintendents change their vacancy rates, school division by school division. We also know that alternative pathways are being used by our school divisions. We know that school divisions are using things like iTeach. We have visited Essex County and talked with some of their switchers who are in their iTeach program, who are getting their teaching license. They may have come from criminal justice, or they may have been a psychology major, but they were called to teach. And those school divisions are working to reduce their vacancies by using those alternative methods in collaboration to make sure those teachers have high quality opportunities. As an administration, we have invested over $29 million, and that is attached to your letter in a complete outline of the support and the grants, both to teachers, but also to mentors to support those need teachers, to develop teachers, and continue to do that work. And third, JLARC mentioned the apprenticeship. And the apprenticeship model is a new emerging model for Virginia, but it is an established model in multiple states, whether it's Texas, North Dakota, Iowa, or Delaware. They are building apprenticeship models based on the US Department of Labor apprenticeship approval and the strict guidelines in that. We know that there are many educators, future educators that serve our communities, whether they're bus drivers, paraprofessionals, custodial workers, front staff workers that can't afford to be teachers in their own communities. The apprenticeship model provides a low cost, no cost option for localized pipeline development that allows superintendents to carry those folks who want to be teachers, want to serve their community, but that fiscal cost that JLARC mentioned, $57,000, which is a real barrier to those folks who want to be teachers, it allows them to become teachers. So we need to continue to invest in these alternative pathways and equip our school divisions with these pipeline development options to help reduce those vacancies that are localized and are being seen in certain divisions, but not other divisions across our state. I also want to talk about the licensure barriers. In May, we had 16,000 licensure cases sitting in the department. And as Lauren mentioned, in 2020, it was a very paper-based approach. It was still a paper-based approach in March 2023. We immediately shifted the way in which we process licenses and valued our experts and streamlined that process so they could focus on licensure. Those experts process 200 licenses a day today, every single day. And I'm incredibly proud of that staff. And I want to call that out, that they are doing great work to make sure that those licenses are processed efficiently and effectively. We also empowered our school division superintendents to have a digital process to extend provisional licenses and allowed them to do that in not a paper-based way and not convoluted inside the other licensure processes to ensure those were processed quickly. And as Lauren mentioned, we extended the renewals until we have that digital processing system. I don't know how many of you have ordered Domino's pizza, but you can now see when your pizza goes in the oven, when it moves to the carrier, when the driver comes. That's the intended licensure system we plan to launch, something that is very transparent. It shows everybody how their licensure is moving through the system, and it now allows those renewals to move very quickly. So we're very excited about these barriers being removed and transparent for our educators, for our school divisions, to make sure that we can get those high quality licensed teachers into classrooms. We have processed over 5,000 licenses of initial licensures to give school divisions the opportunity to make sure those teachers who are coming out of programs and those initial licenses have that opportunity. We need to continue to think about reciprocity and universal licensure. And those are things we want to continue to work with the General Assembly to think about to make sure that we can provide high quality options. But most importantly, I want to come back to a lot of the conversation that Justin mentioned. We need a high quality data system that allows us in real time to know which teacher preparation programs, whether traditional, whether they're alternative, whether the new apprenticeship, how those are actually providing teachers to our school divisions, how our school divisions are staffing classrooms, how those school divisions are retaining those teachers from different programs, and most importantly, how those programs are impacting children and how we know which types of programs are providing localized solutions for school divisions, allowing school divisions to staff, but most importantly, especially with the data that was released last week, are impacting children every day. And so we will ask for that system. We are working to think about that system and making sure we have that system, we have a student system, and that we can really communicate the impact of our teachers every day across Virginia. Thank you very much.
Any questions? Chairman? Yes.
Follow-up, the section 3 of your joint letter, Dr. Jones, the Secretary indicates that 40 to 50% of submissions for licensing are maintained and you're working through the system. It sounds very familiar to subject matter that this commission also dealt with in the Employment Commission in terms of the complexity of language, complexity of process, and a high initial failure rate. This is like replicating, it seems like the same thing. Can you go to specifics of measures of how you're going to reduce that rate, simplify it?
Yes, sir. I think part of that is being transparent about the process and having that new system that actually is very clearly outlines those expectations and walks an applicant through that process. Part of the building of the new digital process is getting feedback loops from users and making sure that's clear and transparent. So that is built in as we are launching that new system to make sure it has that user transparency and those user stories that we use when we build new databases to make sure they have ease of use and clarity.
Sure. One follow-up.
Yes, indeed.
Early in your presentation, Doctor, you indicated that you cited climate as a major reason why they're leaving the workforce. Can you indicate what might be creating that climate?
Yeah, I'm speaking to the JLARC study and the JLARC research. So in the JLARC study, they mentioned that working conditions in 75% responded in the survey and that workload was a 68% indicator. So I would be relied on their data, but that's what their data are.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One last follow-up. Sir, Madam Secretary, you indicated you needed information or analysis to assess a deeper dive into a higher vacancy rate of spots in County. Is that right? Section 1 of the letter. Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'll leave it there. The Board of Education approved a superintendent without education qualifications, as well as if you read the newspaper, you probably assess what the climate, some of the administration, and how it's impacted that climate. So I'll leave it at that.
And I would just interject, I think the point of what's said there in number 1 is that whether superintendent, school board, others in central office administration, the local government atmosphere or the local school division atmosphere has a tremendous impact on teacher recruitment and retention. And without having hard data specifically across the state, we can't get into some of the causes of this. It becomes so much vagaries of local government. And I say that as one who lives in Spotsylvania County.
Also, we know across the hallway last week, we released data, learning loss data. During my remarks, I mentioned also coming out of the pandemic, it's the 44th state to open our schools. We know that our students, by not being in school together, are hurting right now and struggling. They're struggling academically, they're struggling emotionally, they're struggling with being back in person, and this is what our teachers are feeling. We're being dealt with so many that we are feeling as a society, and we're asking more. The teachers are tired, they're to handle with what is for school. I would argue that so much of that, to your question, comes from decisions that were made to keep our schools closed.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, Dr. Jones. Thank you. Now we'll move to the next topic.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, our second and last item of the day. Next is the presentation of findings from our review of Virginia's incentives to encourage businesses to locate and expand in the state. This work was conducted as part of our ongoing evaluation of Virginia Economic Development Incentives, partnership with the Wellham Cooper Center at the University of Virginia. The group of incentives examined for this review includes some of the major incentives administered by the Virginia Economic Development Partnership, including the Commonwealth Opportunity Fund. Kimberly Sartay is the Associate Director who oversaw this work. Ellen Miller was the project, the JLARC lead for the review and present the findings. Ellen?
Morning, Ellen.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members. How mentioned, I'm Ellen Miller, and I'll brief you on our evaluation of Virginia's business location and expansion. Slide 2 just describes the mandate for the incentive evaluation. This report is our 7th in-depth evaluation. When we started on this, I didn't know we would get this far, but here we are. We're on number 7, and all 7 are listed here on this slide. For this report, we evaluated 9 incentives. They included 5 incentives administered by VEDP, including, as Hal mentioned, the Commonwealth Opportunity Fund, and also the Virginia Investment Partnership. Collectively, the VEDP incentives are the largest incentives in this. Slide 5 lists our key findings. We found that the Commonwealth Opportunity Fund sways some business and has higher economic benefits than other Virginia incentives. Other incentives VEDP administers have varying economic benefits and usefulness for business. The major business facility job tax credit is not well designed and unlikely to influence business decisions. We found that the agriculture and forestry industries development facility grant has a limited impact on location and expansion decisions, but appears to have other benefits. And last, we found that the farm, wineries, and vineyards tax credit had less impact than other factors on the rapid growth of Virginia's wine industry. I'll first turn to our findings and recommendations for VEDP's locations. As I mentioned, we evaluated 5 incentives administered by VEDP. These include the Commonwealth Opportunity Fund, or COF, which is the state's deal closing grant, and the VIP grant, which encourages the state's manufacturers to expand. This group also includes VDIC, a grant that was adopted in 2005 to attract companies creating a large number of high-paying jobs. This particular program only had 1 completed project during our study. Then there's the New Company Incentive Program, which was adopted in 2018. And this program is designed to encourage companies to locate in distressed areas of the state and create jobs. And last, the MEE program, or the Major Eligible Employer Program. This program is older and it hasn't been used in some time. Slide 8 shows that most of the spending over the entire 10 years that we evaluated has been for the COF and VIP grants, with nearly 2/3 of the spending for the COF. Turning to our findings, VEDP's location and expansion grants are well designed, with the exception of the New Company Incentive. This slide rates the incentives as either meeting, partially meeting, or not meeting criteria of effective incentive design according to economic development incentive research. As you can see, the COF meets all of the criteria, and the VIP, VDIG, and MEE grants meet nearly all of them. Unlike other VEDP grants, the New Company Incentive Program does not incentivize higher paying jobs, and does not require projects to be competitive or considering out-of-state locations. This program also only partially meets other criteria. We also found that the COF and VIP grants sway some business location and expansion decisions, with COF swaying more than the average incentive. Both grants were also rated favorably by grant awardees and local economic development. Slide 12 shows that the percentage of COF and VIP recipients that indicated their projects would not have occurred without the grant. This is based on results from a survey of grant recipients. Of note, more COF recipients reported the project would not have happened without the grant than recipients of other incentives. The portion for the VIP grant, however, is lower than for the average. COF and VIP grants also had higher ratings than the average incentive on various areas of performance. For example, they rated the grants more highly for helping the company to create jobs and invest in machinery and equipment. The VIP grant was rated more favorably than the average incentive for all but one of the performance areas. COF was rated the third most useful incentive in the state, and the VIP grant the sixth most useful incentive by local economic development. Yeah, and this is out of 34 incentives that they were asked. We also found that the economic benefits of VEDP's location and expansion grants range from low to high. All of the VEDP grants, however, have high returns in state revenue relative to. As a reminder from past presentations, when I'm talking about economic benefits, what I'm talking about is our estimation of the job creation, state GDP, and personal income that is added to the economy because of the incentive. We estimate these amounts for every 1 million spent to make the results comparable across incentives because spending does vary widely by program. We also estimate the return in state revenue generated for every $1 spent on the incentive. And then we compare the results across all incentives that we have evaluated so far. And basically we rate each one as having a high, moderate, low, or negligible benefit. And also one other thing I'll point out is that basically we're making a relative comparing the incentives against each other. This slide shows that the COF has high economic benefits. The VEDP grant, which is the one shown on the bottom, has moderate economic. The VIP grant, the one in the middle, has low economic benefits. The primary reason for this result for VIP is that the grant is a job retention grant and not a job creation grant. And it's job creation that really influences the economic impact result. As you can see on the right-hand side, all of the grants listed have high returns in state revenue per dollars. Now I'll turn to our recommendations for improving VEDP grant offers. We don't have any recommendations at this time for the COF grant because it is well designed and has relatively high economic benefits. I'll start with two grants that have seen little use during our study period, beginning with the MEE grant. This particular grant has only been used by 2 companies since it was adopted in 1999. The last grant that was made from this program was actually in fiscal year 06. A key reason that the grant has not been used is that it's basically been supplanted by the legislature's adoption of custom grants that are more flexible and tailored for each. The new company incentive program also had limited use with only 2 grant awards made to date. Funding for this grant comes from the COF grant, and this allows projects that do not qualify for a COF grant to access COF funding. Neither company that received a grant from this program would have qualified for the better designed COF, but they were able to receive higher awards they would likely have received if they had been eligible for a COF based on the average COF award. The last point I'll make is that both new company incentive projects awards other state incentives. So other programs already serve the types of projects that would qualify. This slide notes our recommendations for the General Assembly to consider eliminating the MEE grant and allowing the new company incentive program. The economic benefits of the VIP or the VIP and VEDP grant will be improved by allowing grant payments to begin soon. By statute, payments cannot begin until 3 years after the project has performed. But research indicates that later grant payments reduces the influence of the grant. Delayed payments may explain why VIP recipients reported a relatively low portion of projects would not have occurred without the grant. VIP and VDIG payments could begin sooner, similar to the COF payments, which now typically begins within a year after performance. And slide 20 lists our recommendations for the General Assembly to consider allowing payments for these two grants paid out. And with that, Mr. Chairman,
Any question? Roll.
all right, now I'll turn to the major business facility job. This credit incentivizes companies to locate in Virginia and create jobs. It's available to non-retail businesses that create at least 50 jobs or at least 25 jobs if the project is in a area. Credit amount is $1,000 per job for jobs over the 50 or 25 job. Over the 10-year study period, 32 million in tax credits were awarded, but a very small number of companies received most tax credits. We found that the major business facility job tax credit is not well designed and is not likely to influence. In terms of design, this slide rates the credit on several features. The only criteria the credit fully meets are having an expiration date and targeting distressed areas. In terms of influence, the credit is unlikely to influence business decisions because the credit amount is only $1,000 per job. This is lower than the amount per job for the average Virginia grant and is far lower than the amount per job for job tax credits in other states. Stakeholders also indicated that this tax credit functions more like a reward for jobs. We did find, however, that the major business facility job tax credit has moderate economic benefits. This is likely because the credit requires job creation. The credit, however, has a low return in state revenue relative to other instances. The economic benefits and returns in revenue are listed on this slide. And I indicated the benefits are moderate because they are similar to the economic benefits of the average incentive. I'll point out, though, that while the credit falls within the moderate range, its economic benefits are lower than most grants. Return in state revenue is 26 cents, and this will be rated low because it's lower than the average. We identified several changes that would improve the tax credit's design and economic impact. Eligibility could be restricted to export-based businesses and to businesses that pay above a certain wage threshold. And these changes would better target the credit to higher impact businesses. Adopting a program or per taxpayer would better align the program to best practice. The DP could administer the tax, especially if the previously mentioned improvements are adopted. Right now, Virginia Tax administers the credit. We feel the improvements would require a more in-depth approval process, which DEDP is better positioned to accomplish because of the process it uses for administering the grant. DEDP would also be better positioned to make policy recommendations to further improve the credit, such as making a recommendation for increasing the award per job to increase the influence of the credit on business. However, if these improvements are not made, the credit could be allowed to expire. As with the new company incentive program, we found that businesses using this tax credit have benefited from other incentives that are better designed. Slide 32 lists our recommendations for the General Assembly to make improvements to the credit or allow it to expire. And with that, I'll pause. If there are any questions?
Chairman? Question, yes, I'm sorry. Yep, so when you're talking about the economic benefits of the different programs, how did you calculate turn in revenue? What all does that pay?
So for data analysis, we use the REMI model of Dr. office, Weldon Cooper, does that. But basically, what we're doing is looking at the jobs that were created and any other activity that can be estimated with the model to see what types of impact it has on additional job creation, state GDP, and personal income. And then actually I don't think the revenue analysis is a little bit off. And he uses other.
Delegate, we use state government revenue data from US Census Finance, and we benchmark it against certain economic data. And when we do these simulations, we get results like GDP, personal income, and a few other things. And we compare it to that baseline data. And we sort of portioned out and then applied to the impact. So it's a model derived revenue result based on data. So there are different revenue categories. Sales and use tax, sales of different types of commodities. And GDP is compared to corporate profits, personal income to income taxes and so forth. We have a revenue model that is a consistent pattern for all the programs.
Thank you.
With that, I'll move next to our review of the Agriculture and Forestry Industries Development Facility Grant. This grant is offered to attract and expand agribusinesses and forestry businesses in Virginia. It's available to companies that process or manufacture agriculture or forestry products and create jobs, make a capital investment, and purchase at least 30% of their raw products from Virginia sources. The average grant award is typically small, with the average award being $88,000 per year over the 10 years. But because of several large awards in fiscal year 21, the average award that year was over $200,000. We found that the aphid facility grant has a limited influence on state agriculture and forestry activity. However, the grant may be useful for encouraging purchases of some declining commodities, and stakeholders report that it is useful. Slide 36 shows that only 16% of recipients said they would not have undertaken the project without the grant. This is less than for the average incentive. We also found that the minimum commodity threshold, which is 30% of raw commodity purchase, is likely too low and may not effectively incentivize purchase. On the left, you see that grant recipients typically purchase well over the threshold, as do most Virginia firms that purchase raw commodities, and that's the bar on the right. The problem with having a low threshold is it allows the potential for businesses purchasing a much lower than average portion of Virginia raw commodities to qualify for the grant. We did find, however, that the grant may help bolster commodities that are declining. Aphid facility grant recipients purchase 5 types of commodities at proportionally high rates compared to their statewide average purchase. 4 of these commodities have seen declining purchases within our study. Like the COF and BIP grants, stakeholders report the grant is useful. It's rated the second most useful incentive by local economic development. And 2/3 of recipients reported the grant was very important to their ability to invest in equipment. We found, however, that the aphid facility grant meets only some criteria of effective economic development incentives. You've seen this slide before, so I won't spend much time on it, but I will note the aphid facility grant only meets 2 criteria of effective design, and that it is a job creation grant, but does not have a wage. We also found that the grant generates moderate economic benefits per 1 million spent and a moderate return in state revenue. Slide 43 lists the economic benefits and return in state revenue generated by the APHID facility grant. Both are rated moderate, and these amounts are similar to the average. By the way, in your packet, there is a slide that lists the economic benefits and returning revenue for the average for the end of this. We identified several changes that would improve the grant's economic impact and design. One change is to increase the commodity threshold to 50%, which is the average proportion of state-grown commodity purchases by all Virginia firms. Secretary of Agriculture and Forestry has the ability to waive this requirement for a project of statewide importance. Some projects appear to be meeting the commodity threshold based on weight rather than value of the commodity, which could allow low-value goods to qualify for the grant by meeting the weight criteria. The guidelines could be clarified to base the threshold on value rather than weight. And this would increase the economic. Adopting a minimum wage threshold would also increase the economic impact of the jobs that are created. Next two slides summarize our recommendation. This one summarizes our recommendation directed at the Secretary of Agriculture and Forestry along with VDAC and the Department of Forestry to revise the guidelines to increase the commodity threshold and also to clarify the minimum threshold should be based on value, not weight. And then this slide summarizes our recommendation for the General Assembly to consider adopting a wage threshold for jobs.
Question.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
Marshall, return on investment, like
Yes. Just state, not. Right, when there's a match, like a local match, we will include that.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
You know, when you first started out, you said something about some other benefits, small business, about the APHID. And one thing that I'm highly aware of, have a very urban area like Virginia Beach, where I'm from, it transitions to a rural area down there. We have a lot of pressures to develop farmland down there. And some of these APHID grants that further value, pick your own, like refrigeration equipment and some of that, is taking the development pressure off of this land because these people have some pick your owns, agritourism down there. By helping to incentivize some of these things, take that development pressure off. I'm very familiar with hundreds of acres in my neck of the woods that have to pick your own down there that because of these APHID grants aren't growing houses as opposed to growing apples.
Thank you. Continue, please.
And now I'll turn to the farm wineries and vineyards. This credit was adopted to promote the growth of Virginia's wine industry. It's valued at 25% of eligible purchases to start or improve a winery or vineyard in the state. The program has an annual cap of $250,000 per year, and like many cap credits, prorated if total credit requests exceed. We found that Virginia's wine industry has grown substantially, but likely not because of the farm wineries. It appears more likely that other factors have influenced growth. I will say there is no question that Virginia's wine industry has seen rapid growth over the past several decades. And you can see that Virginia's growth has far exceeded national growth. However, this growth is likely not because of the credit, because most of the growth occurred before the credit was adopted, which is One reason the tax credit likely isn't influencing the growth in Virginia's wine industry because the credit is so small. As I said, it is 25% of eligible wine production expenses, but the credit has been heavily oversubscribed and had to be prorated, and recipients are only receiving about 2.6% of their eligible purchases back in tax. I didn't point it out, but slide 48 does note that the average tax credit for business is only about $5,000. Because of this low amount, it is also not surprising that the proportion of recipients that reported the project would not have happened without is 19%, which is lower than the average. I'll also mention that credit recipients rated other state programs as being more important for influencing the growth of their wine business. This slide shows that the tax credit ranked 5th out of 10 programs they were asked. Of note, the one on the top is the Virginia Winery Company, and that one was rated most important. 61% of survey respondents said the distribution company was very important in helping them grow their business, compared to only 38% for the tax. We found that the credit has negligible economic benefits and negligible returns in revenue relative to other incentives. As you can see, these estimates are on the slide are fairly small, and they are much lower than the estimate for the average incentive. Just for example, the average incentive is estimated to generate 56 additional jobs per million spent, and this one is only 2. Because the incentive has had limited influence on Virginia's wine industry growth and its negligible benefits, we recommend that the general that are eliminated. And with that, Mr. Chair, that completes my presentation, but I'll be happy to address.
Ellen, are any of the folks eligible for the wineries and vineyards tax credit also getting anything under APHIT? They're eligible
Think
to do
there's-
so, I would think.
Yeah, there's some.
Follow up, but they would be the only business entity that can kind of, like, better double dip. That'd be great.
Both of those.
Thank you. Other questions? All right, thank you, Ellen. Good job. Al, we're close to on time.
You are close
Not
to
bad
on
for
time.
us, yeah.
Well done by you. Mr. Chairman, that does conclude our agenda. Our next meeting will be Monday, October 16th, and I've been told that we should be able to have the meeting in the new General Assembly building. We'll be presenting the findings from our study of self-sufficiency in childcare, as well as our review of enhanced benefits for additional public safety occupations. I'd also like to note that we'll be having the meeting of the JLARC Topic Selection Subcommittee at 9 a.m. that same morning. If you have thoughts or ideas about potential JLARC study topics, please feel to share those with the chairman of the subcommittee, Senator Pike, or with me prior to the subcommittee meeting. Thank you very much for your attention today.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I just have a comment, question from Mr. Fair. I've been looking at your reports for many, many years. Actually sitting on the committee, it's only been a year or two now. Do you ever do an addendum to your reports? I don't know if I've ever seen one. The reason I ask that is the last 2 meetings in particular, and of course, you know, government usually has been known to operate at a slow pace at times, and yet there are times when we have actually taken the horn and moved rather quickly. And I think that has happened in the last couple of years post-COVID when we had some important issues to address with education and some other areas. But in particular, I'm speaking to the report that at the last meeting that came out that had information that was somewhat outdated, dealing with investments that were made in the recent budget, yet they weren't reflected in the report. And I understand you must have lines to get all that information together and then actually put it out in a report. And then today we had some information, and we clearly spoke about maybe data being not inaccurate, but incomplete. And so I was just wondering, because we rely a lot on and respect the recommendations that JLARC makes. And I think it would be helpful for people that aren't at the meetings to realize that sometimes the timeline doesn't coordinate with the current and most accurate data.
Yeah, there's sometimes it's not a great time, right? We will sometimes make an effort to provide more up-to-date data when we think it's useful to the members. I don't think July meeting, I don't think those are not, our view was not accurate to the situation in terms of outdated data. We're using data that's available, and there won't be new data for a long time there. So in that particular case, but there are situations where, yeah, we would certainly be open to doing follow-up work and providing additional data with things where we don't have the latest data. There often are data lags, which is something we face. Sometimes it can take 1, 2, even 3 years before data comes out. So we're using prior years, and that's just a reality we have to live with. We're happy when there are times where you think you'd like to see some updated data. We're certainly more than happy to bring that back to you at a later time. Just for correction.
Mr. Chairman, just a quick follow-up.
Yes, ma'am.
Not to belabor it, but specifically, we were talking about a $3 billion investment that was made. That was pretty important and significant piece that should have been noted in that report.
For the critical analysis for that report, we had up-to-date data. The only thing we had lagging data on for that report, July report, SRQ report, was data on for doing comparisons with other states, other kinds of models, the benchmark analysis, because some of those other states, other models did not have updated data. So there's no way to do the benchmark comparison using up-to-date data. It just wasn't available. We used the most recent data we could for that. But when we turn to what Virginia should be investing in SQ funding based on actual spending, that was using up-to-date data. So critical analysis, we had completely up.
Any other commission members have anything to go to the commission before we adjourn? Thank everybody for coming out. Safe travels home. With that, we'll rise. Thank you.
Well done.